My name is Barbara Fears, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon. I am here with Jennifer Oz Freeman, Assistant Professor of Theology and the Arts at United Theological Seminary in the Twin Cities. Callid Keefe-Perry, Visiting Assistant Professor of Islamic and Interreligious Studies at Wesley Theological Seminary. A former Garrett colleague, Mark Chung Hearn, Director of Contextual Education and Assistant Clinical Professor of Contextual Education and Ministry at Seattle University School of Theology and Ministry. And Callid Keefe-Perry, Traveling Minister within the Religious Society of Friends. We are going to engage in conversation very deeply, but not as originally planned. So we are doing a new thing. And now Mark is going to lead us in that discussion.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you to you all for being here in this session. And we have noticed that, okay, let me put it this way. When I first started out at REA about 12 years ago, REA was a very generous place. And it was a place where young scholars could come and really invest in their lives, and people invest in their lives back. And so we want to continue that to be the space that REA is and has been for this many years. And so what we were talking about as a group together, I mean, really up to the last minute, 4:29, really, was how do we continue to have this space be that space? Where it's a very generous and it's a very forming, it's a very educating space for up-and-coming scholars, for senior scholars, for mid-career scholars, that says this is my guild, the REA. This was not an easy decision for us. But because we have to be true to the moment that is right now at the REA, we felt like we couldn't just go on as planned. So I hope that you hold that decision of ours and the struggle, real struggle that we've had. As gently as that little chick that Dr. Ellison was talking about earlier this morning. This is not easy for us, 5, here. In fact, it's far different. Barbara said that she's a moderator, but because of the makeup of the group, of the original panel, we said, no, Barbara, you need to be in on the conversation. This is scary for us because Salih is not part of the guild. Jennifer is not part of the guild. They had prepared papers, and we're asking them to be a part of this conversation now. So what we're trying to do in this last plenary panel together is to open up a conversation with the whole plenary. Because these are some of our observations and the observations of my colleagues here. The past 2 days has been difficult. And we have to name that. There's people that do not want to be a part of REA any longer because of the last 2 days. And if we want to see REA continue to go further, we have to name it and we have to face it. I don't know what that's going to look like, but we have to do that here. It would be disingenuous for us to come up here and start talking about best practices that we do in our classrooms, because that's not what the conversation calls for right now. The conversation calls for us to be brave, to be transformative, to create safe space among us. And so I thank all of you that are standing right now in solidarity, those of you that are standing in solidarity in your hearts, and even those of you that are pushing back right now in your hearts, saying, what the hell is going on right now? Okay. So I'd invite those of you that are standing to please take a seat. We're going to listen in on this conversation together for about 20 minutes. And then after the 20 minutes, we're going to open it up for about another 20 minutes in small group conversations. And we have some planned questions, but we also have just open it up to you all to process together. And then we're going to open it up to a larger plenary conversation for about 40 minutes or however long it takes us. I realize, I am the first public voice at this conference that's not giving announcements by a scholar of color that is a part of this guild. That's problematic when we're talking about going beyond white normativity. Some scholars, senior scholars, and we were talking about this, who can we look to as senior scholars in the room to be able to speak wisdom into our conversation right now? Many of those senior scholars are not here, some by choice, because they're pushing back on the centering of white normativity in the conference theme to begin with. So what does it mean for us to go beyond white normativity? What does it mean for us to do anti-racism work together? What does it call for us to say, hey, there's a future for the RA, for students of color, for scholars of color, for white scholars of color, that is far different than what we've had before? Because really, the RA is at a precipice right now, and there are many who are wondering, is RA the place, is RA the guild for me still? And unless we have these conversations, the future is in our hands, right? So with that being said, I wanted to open it up to a conversation. And what we're going to do is we are going to just basically model kind of the franticness that we've had up to this point to talk about why is this a difficult conversation for us to have and why we need this conversation. You'll hear bits and pieces of different observations as well as prepared comments throughout. And then after about 20 minutes, we'll have small group conversation that way. Okay? So who wants to be the first in terms of opening us up?
Who want to be the brave mouse, right? So I can, one thing, I'm very new to the organization, and I will say I'm also very new to the context that we have, so far, when it comes to racism especially. So I am, a person who came from the Middle East as an immigrant, and on the paper I am considered a white. And at the university setup, I am the faculty of color. So one of the problem really, so when you come from a culture when you don't have these concepts, it is really difficult to translate these classifications. So I have a struggle. So really, who am I in this context? I am in the discussion of race, white normativity. It is who decides for this classification, who decides my identity. I'm someone who struggles with these concepts, to say the least. Of course, I say this as a Muslim.
I guess so the piece that's really weighing on my heart is that the question around white normativity is baked into the bedrock of things. I'm from central Massachusetts. I'm a first-generation white college student living on the land that was taken from the Nipmuc people. I now live in Arlington, Massachusetts, on the land that was taken from the Wampanoag. The history of colonization in this country is the history of this country. And I think about the ways in which that gets reflected in systems and structures of subjugation and domination more than just contemporary current events. If any of you teach doctoral students, and the teaching of anti-racism and anti-colonialism isn't a necessary part of your curriculum, what are you doing? a necessary part of your curriculum. If any of you train clergy in any religion, and the work of dismantling systems of oppression and subjugation are not part of what it means to be a person of God, what are you doing? That's not just about the current president of the United States of America. That's about deep-seated problems within the institutions that machinate all kinds of cultural improprieties. And I want us to talk about these moments in the ways that those large systems are showing up here too. Earlier today, we were in a panel, and someone said, as practitioners of religious education, those of us that are in the guild, we often talk about wanting to focus on critical consciousness. What would it be like to run a conference that also believes that?
You know, I want to bring up a little bit of our frantic hurriedness, right, in the other room when we're talking about this. Why is it that we need to have a different conversation, right? And you all are kind of pointing it in on this. But can we kind of bring the conversation to, I mean, not bring the conversation to, but can we share a little bit about why this has been so problematic and so painful for so many of us, right? I have seen in the breakout sessions, I've seen some whites really own their self-reflexivity, their self-awareness, the other awareness, the group awareness, the relational awareness. I've seen that. And at the same time, I've also seen many scholars of color, many persons of color here, been very wounded. Right? Can we talk about that? Like, can we just say, what have we seen? What have you processed yourself? You know, I'm curious, Callid, as I'm putting you on the spot, but as a white male, right? What has been going on in your mind? Jennifer, as a white female, and somebody who's not in the guild, as an outsider coming in, you're going, what is going on? I thought I was gonna talk about my church art history canon, right? And be done. But then you're coming into this and going, what is going on, right? Barbara, as an African American black woman, who we go back way number of years, I know there's something deeply stirring in you, right? So how do we? I mean, what is it? What are the people around us maybe feeling?
I mean, just since you pointed out, I'll just say, to the extent that I am ever useful in the work towards justice, it's only because I've screwed up so damn much and then named it. God, I have fucked up. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
That's on tape.
I'm sorry. Sorry. There have been ways in which I have done heinous things, and it's only because of my willingness to then name them and try to change that it's ever been possible. And so I'm lucky. Because I could easily imagine my life having gone another way where I wouldn't even know there's a problem. It's only because, in some ways, I said earlier in a panel, someone asked, like, what are you thinking? And I said, I'm trying to think about what are all the things I'm not seeing. And I'm literally going through the litany in my mind of the faces and friends and colleagues of people say, what would they tell me if they were here? I try not to kind of sit in that space without running through how is it looking to someone else.
Yeah. But as a Korean American male, I need you to do that. I need you to run through that litany. I need you to be aware. Right? There's a concept in And you not meaning just you, Callid, right? But people with power and privilege. I need them to do that because for many minoritized persons, if you want to call it that, we do that all the time. We're always constantly negotiating what does it mean to have this bifurcating consciousness, right? There's a concept in Korean called nunchi. And I know that some of the Koreans in here know what this is, right? It's this idea, and some people translate it as intuition, but it's not intuition. It is being able to come into a room and read what you are supposed to be in that room. Because you're so aware of what the other people are in that room. You're so aware of your own location and your own power, the privilege that you possess or not possess in that space and in that room. And so you do things that maybe other people don't see because your nunchi is high. Let me give you an example. You're at church. People start cleaning up after the fellowship hour, the tables and the chairs. And you as a person see that other people are cleaning up the table, your nunchi kicks in and you say, I need to go clean up that table. You're aware of the other person. And for many whites and for many people who are in dominant positions, they don't have to do that. And so for you to say that to me, Callid, and to say that to the rest of the group, I keep saying yes and continue to keep doing that. Because that's what I need. I need you to continue to do that. Because that's what I'm doing and that's what other people of color are doing all the time.
Hi. So it's not my conference. I didn't mean it to come out like that. Sorry. It's not my guild. I'm a medieval art historian, or sometimes I say, depending on the crowd, I'm a church historian who does stuff with pictures. And it's been very educational to come in and see this. And what we've talked about in our group some over the last month, actually, that we've been talking in advance of the conference as well. There are not a lot of guilds that are academic guilds that are having this conversation at all. So not that you all should give yourself a pat on the back quite yet, but I think that is an accomplishment in and of itself. I come from a discipline, medieval studies, that is very, very white, and it knows it has a problem, and it thankfully has taken to dealing with that more explicitly in the last 2 years, particularly since Charlottesville and the use of medieval symbols on the fake armor of white supremacists, and there's a whole thing we could talk about there. And there are groups, and I think there's a question about visibility of scholars of color in academic guilds. So in medieval studies, there's a self-formed group called Medievalists of Color that have taken to organizing sometimes like para groups or almost guerrilla meetings alongside of, depending on the conference that they're meeting at. And I guess a larger question I have, or I would love to hear from people about on all levels, is how to do the work of challenging white normativity and white supremacy without continuing to center white normativity and systems of white supremacy. So, and how do white folks step up and do that work, but by not making it all about themselves at the same time? So there's like maybe too many questions in there. One model that I've found successful is that at the International Congress of Medieval Studies that meets at Kalamazoo every year, the Medievalists of Color have put on something called, that they call the Whiteness Workshop. And it's basically an opportunity for white scholars to step up and take responsibility and meet in groups. Not totally just all the white scholars, but it's run by the Medievalists of Color. It is something that we've had security at because of threats against the Medievalists of Color. There's lots of things. If you Google Dorothy Kim, who's an Asian American medievalist, she has endured a lot in the last several years. So it's complicated, it's very messy. There are people who are trying to do that work. But I think that the spaces that we make, no matter what the theme of your conference is important. So I think it's great that this conference has happened, this session, or this theme has happened, but what spaces can you make every meeting for these conversations, and especially to hold, white people accountable for doing the work? Sorry, that was too many things.
A couple of things come to mind. I think I'm going back to something Mark said. First of all, I enjoy the conference. It's kind of like coming home for a holiday. And you know what it's like being with family. There's a great deal of intellectual energy here, and I'm inspired. And there have been moments, certainly where family gets on your nerves. And I can feel those moments of insult, but I'm also a black woman, so going to the grocery store can be a moment of insult. And we grow weary of doing the work, but it is work that is necessary, it's essential, it's very important. And there have been moments of insult, that's all I can say. And I would put the question out here for all of us to answer, what are those moments that have made us uncomfortable and why? The other thing this discussion has forced me to do around areas of pedagogy and just commitment to decentering whiteness is changing language. I have committed to no longer referring to people of color as non-whites, because I firmly believe that whites represent humanity and people of color have been so dehumanized by being theologically redefined as savages and heathens and thugs and rapists and terrorists and N-words and so forth and so on. So to refer to people of color as non-whites is to suggest they are non-human. So with that in mind, that is a commitment that I make as a result of the discussions that we've been having. And that is just one challenge to myself, to be intentional and committed to changing my language around some of these things. I don't have to deconstruct whiteness. Liberation scholars have done this, post-colonial scholars have done this, Asian and African, and I mean, what more can we say about this topic? But I can commit to trying not to be complicit in promoting it and advancing it and perpetrating it. And I can do that as a start with my choice of words. I can also do that in teaching moments. Now, as I said in my presentation, if we pick every time it happens, it's tiring, and for certain people of color, it could be dangerous because it could get us killed. So we have to be selective about those moments and how we choose to engage those teaching moments. But we can do it, and I'm committed to doing that. And as I said, I'm committed to changing my language as a result of these exchanges and these encounters to decenter whiteness as much as I can in my life, given that that is just the nature of the United States.
Just as a follow-up to Jennifer and Barbara, in Islamic studies, we face, again, Muslim scholars, I would say they face various challenges. But I also should note that there is great progress in terms of who speaks for Islam. So there is, when we address challenges, I think it's important for me to note that we have lots of progress currently. That's one thing. Even under the current, within the current political climate, I'm talking about, the university setup. But one thing, when it comes to who speaks for Islam, one of the major challenges is that still Muslim scholars, they make a very small percentage of those who teach Islam. So basically, the majority still are, white Christians. So in a way, I will see when it comes to teaching Islam or defining the narrative about Islam is there is a good connection to white normativity. So this is one thing. The other thing is, and again, one of the other thing that I personally face it is because most of the students who come to the class, they have really a good amount of knowledge about Islam. But it either comes from the media or it comes from politics. So in a way, they are learned, students. They already have a knowledge about Islam when they come to the class. And in a way, I would define it as a learned ignorance. And it is extremely difficult to undo learned ignorance.
We are at 20 minutes, and you don't introduce a theme like this and then expect it to be all done in 2 days. So we're going to leave this conversation open, and we're going to ask you all now to pair up, to group up into about 4 to 5 persons around you. If you see that you need to move to a different group so that you can get a different perspective, I invite you and encourage you to do that. The panelists are going to be coming around with questions. We're going to give you about 20 minutes to talk in your groups around any one of the questions that might stir in you, something that we might have said, or any one of the questions that are before you. And then we will come back together as a group together and talk. I'm going to give it over to Callid here.
I would just say take care of yourself. So if you need to get a glass of water or breathe or leave, and you need someone to leave with you, that's fine. Do what you need to do.
All right, so take a look at the questions. I'll give you a minute first. Take a look at the questions, and then go ahead and group up into groups of 4 to 5. What we're going to do here is take the next about 20 minutes, a little bit shy of 20 minutes. We're going to be done by the 10 minutes to the hour. And we have 3 mics around. And what we're asking each of the groups is that you designate one person to speak and about some of the things that you talked about, at least one thing, okay, so that we have enough space for all the other groups to talk out. And then if your group was going to say something, the same thing, then go ahead and just pass. If you have something new, then go ahead and raise your hand that way. Okay, does that make sense? That way we can give enough opportunity for all of the groups to be able to talk, okay? So we ask that you keep your comments brief, maybe 30 seconds to a minute at the most. And if you want to ask questions to people across the room, we're decentered. We're not here anymore. We're not going to answer questions necessarily, but we want there to be robust conversation this way. Okay? And then we'll close with some closing comments. Okay, so who wants to be the first group that shares?
Hello, I'm Hannah. And talking about the questions, I think it inclines more towards the first question about what seemed problematic and why did it catch us. So seeing the breakout sessions, one of the things that we noticed, it was brought in our conversation, is that Asians are going to the Asian topics. So there were topics that seemed interesting for a particular group. So it was not collective or a diverse group representation. The sessions did not seem that exciting for others. And then that also was okay, the minority voices are supposed to be heard by the majority, but where is the majority in the room was one of the questions that was raised. Coming to that, I think one of the reasons why it did not happen that way is because minority scholars are put together in one session. So maybe that's one reason why people did not want to attend those sessions. The one thing that I spoke about is how when I want to speak heart to a person, but then the color comes in between. So I think one of the questions that I had was, would people listen to me because I look different from them? Or would they listen to me because I have something to say? That's another thing that came up. And also being an international student, like most of the Asian students here are international students, and we were thinking about the problem that we have about language and that we come with an accent. So how sometimes our words are devalued because of the accents that we have. So these are all the things that we found problematic, and we just wanted to put this out there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And help us with your name.
Hannah Injamuri.
Thank you, Hannah. Others?
My name is Christopher Tay, and one of the things that came up in our group is just the privilege that whiteness gives for some folks to feel this is an optional space. Oh, we're going to talk about this again. Oh, I guess I have to put my race hat on, or I have to have certain goggles on that I can then perhaps remove later. That there's a privilege to some senior scholars who, and I know it's complicated, but senior scholars who don't have to be here because it's a difficult conversation, that in planning this conference, of which I'm a thankful guest, but I'll host and serve you this comment, that there's also part of the planning committee, a complicity, there's some bit of participation in centering again whiteness and not intervening when perhaps that would have been the best course of action. So that was also an exercise of privilege, not to have to do anything, not to have to engage, and let the moment pass and trust that other colleagues will carry on this work. And it's usually work done on the backs of scholars of color.
So some of the things check, so I don't have to say those two things. I had the great honor to attend the African American Museum on Thursday. It was optional. And this is my first REA conference, but I understand that the other times that there have been excursions, they've been on Friday versus Thursday. I'm not sure about that. I'm concerned because that experience, and I mean experience, will decenter whiteness. It will do the work with and for us. And yet, I wonder why there weren't more of us, why it wasn't mandatory, and why it hasn't come up in the discussions that I've attended. And I would have liked to see that. As theologians and emerging theologians and practical theologians, I can't imagine how we, in the Christian faith, particularly in America, can have that museum that close and all of the theological implications therein, and we haven't said a word. That's a problem for me and for some others in our group. And the syllabus. I do love a syllabus. I'm a PhD candidate, so I can still love it at this point. Tell my advisor, Frank Rogers, Jr. For me, the most profound shaping of my education was when I attended Louisville Presbyterian Seminary. And at that time, the faculty were required to make the syllabus diverse. There had to be representation of different voices on the syllabus. It it's the reason why I'm going on to get my PhD. It's the reason why my theological perspective is broad. And so I wanted to shout that out. But I also, because of my experience, having read a variety of authors and now meeting you all, that I would strongly encourage us to have robust discussions about creating syllabi as professors that represent voices of scholars that are not white, that are not white women and not white men, although they are important too. And to remember that that does not devalue or diminish the rigor, it enhances it. And that must happen immediately. What did I forget? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm John Falcone. Our group thought that it would be good for the REA to have a 5-year plan that guided our conferences. So if we decided to do something to follow through for several years, for example, on this topic, we thought it would be good to center global majority voices and perspectives and contributors as a way to disrupt white normativity. And we thought it would be good to have caucuses of people of color and of white people, which report back to each other.
Hello, my name is Karamhan, and I'm a THM student at Columbia Theological Seminary, and I came to here because I want to feel that I am in the center. So I walked on to here. Yeah. Because from Thursday to today, I haven't felt I am in the center in this conversation and in this conference. And I know this is going to be last plenary, and I want you to feel that. And I am not like really the person spoke up in front of a lot of people because I'm nervous, and I'm an international student. I worry about my language, but I feel like today I need to speak up. Yeah. I think this is not that far from walk from there to here, but for me, I needed courage to come down to here. And the first day, thank you. When I see my name tag, I don't know how many people recognize this one, but there's no my color at all here. That's what I feel all the time when I hear, even though we are talking about the racism, I'm wondering where I'm just keep questioning about like, where am I? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, no, you're first. Go ahead. Okay, I'm sorry, thank you. As you spoke about the name card, we spoke in our group about this, and I'll take it off. You will notice that many of us, we have turned our cards around. and we have bedazzled it, and we have made it beautiful, okay? Because on this card, I saw black hands with ropes. For a black person, my ancestors, they were ropes and hands. They bring back terrible memories. I don't know who was responsible for this. I have no idea what thoughts came into this. I don't know if you thought about us, or if you even thought that we were going to be here, and that this would not bring up bad memories. And so this thing here is all I could think about for the whole time that I've been here. And yes, I've heard a lot of good things going on. And I'm glad that the conversation has been brought up, because it's something that I wanted to hear. I live in a community where only a few black folks live there, and a lot more. I teach in a school where most of the students are white. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And so I am so happy. So the question that I asked the first time, because I don't speak like this, but my passion has risen up. And my question that I asked in the first session when I opened my mouth was, yes, we have started a conversation, but what is it that white folk, white religious educators are going to do now so that we can move beyond this? What is it that you're going to do? Thank you.
I want to speak from the Canadian context, which is different than it is here. We are a multicultural country, officially multicultural, and 95% of Canadians are immigrants to Canada. So 95% of people living in Canada cannot say that this country, Canada, belongs to any particular race or color or ethnic identity. The only ones that are original inhabitants are the First Nations people, right? And the First Nations people have now made it very clear to the rest of Canadians that they matter. And so within a period of, I would say, 25 years, the situation has changed 100%. There was a comment made earlier about why we didn't open the session by acknowledging that we are on Indigenous land. This is now almost standard in Canada. In our university, every official function begins by acknowledging that we are on unceded First Nations territory. And that's also written in all our course syllabi. Now, I think that in order to deal with some of these situations, it also comes down to the individual person. A willingness to step out of one's own comfort zone. A willingness to meet the other, whoever the other is. And that's not always easy. But sometimes it's necessary. So in my practice, in my teaching, I have tried to do some of that. I'm not always good at it, but I have done some of that. And in the willingness to become part of conferences where I'm a minority is not easy, but it's a tremendous learning experience. And some of you know that Muella Selchuk and I were on a writing project that turned into a book. Both of us stepped out of our comfort zones. I went to Turkey, never been there before, to a Muslim country, never done that before. It was very risky. But the rewards were tremendous. And I'm now going to turn the mic over to Muella because I want her to speak a little about that, to indicate that knowing self and others is at the heart of all of this. And for us to really get to know the other, we have to be willing to step out of our comfort zones.
Thank you so very much. Yes, follow your speech, I would like to say that knocking the door of the other needs courage. And we had enough courage. We met in Canada at a conference, and John presented a paper which shows a pedagogical framework which invites a person to reflect on his or her own view. And I was looking for such kind of pedagogy, and I asked him whether he's willing to come to Turkey, and he did. The first time we met with my PhD student, a group of scholars at the university, and John challenged us as a Christian with questions, and we Muslims opened up with responses. It was so hard. At the first meetings, when John asked questions, we couldn't speak, we couldn't open up enough, but then as the time passed by, we developed mutual understanding, and I think to be open, to be willing to learn about the other also help you to learn about yourself. Now my students are very happy to to be in this journey. It lasted 5 years, and we wrote a book. We called it An Islamic Worldview from Turkey, because there is no the, it's always an. So I'm happy to learn the importance of perspective and to the richness of meeting the other, because my tradition says whoever knows himself or herself knows the Lord. And I think who knows the other also knows the Lord. Thank you very much.
Others. We have about 5 minutes left. Okay. So one over here, one over there.
Hi, I'm reporting on our group discussion, and we talked about the importance of white people taking ownership for the work and being the ones to speak to other white people. We also talked about some limitations in that, and that there's only one lens. You know, it could be, I say it happens, and they say no, it doesn't. There's no other lens to qualify that. We also talked about naming the normativity in white culture that's very hierarchical and requires permission. So sometimes when white people are in a position where they should speak out, they don't, because they haven't been given the proper authority to, and it's not in our culture to do that. So there needs to be kind of alongside taking ownership of the work, toppling our own white culture in order to do that. So that was some of the conversations that we had. I also just want to say I am a school chaplain at a school 2 years old through 8th grade. I came here to get some curriculum ideas. And I'm surprised that this work hasn't been happening at this level, because we've been doing this work in schools for a long time. There's the People of Color Conference that's in its like 30th year. The White Privilege Conference had its 20th year last year, so I invite you to join the conversation. And also maybe the White Privilege Conference is for everybody. So I encourage you to look that up and see how they model it. So thank you.
So our group's discussion includes a discussion around question number 2 and question number 8. We talk about the structure perpetuating whiteness, including perhaps the way the question is framed. For example, the dichotomy between white and black. And then, so one of the colleagues in the group invited my thought, given I guess I'm non-white and non-black, and I acknowledged. I said, yeah, I am neither. And then I shared with the group a particular conversation I had with a colleague from Union Theological Seminary who's from Egypt. And then we were saying, because she was helping with my presentation at the conference. So we were sharing, we had very different experience about whiteness from our home country, home culture, which has a long history, which was the civil. Let me see, which was the whiteness we experienced were from those devout missionary Christian missionaries, and they were loving, humble people, and even the civilization we thought were largely they brought to China, to Egypt, the civilizations and hospital, education. So we said that's a very real and our main experience about whiteness in our own cultures. And we were very grateful. And to me, myself, takes in terms of being shaped and being shaped in formation, my own spiritual path, each breakthrough was brought about by Western missionary I had the blessing to encounter in my life before I came here. So that's our experience about white. And then our experience about this type of dialogue here, my union colleague from Egypt said she didn't dare to voice any tiny bit about what I just said to any of her union black or white colleagues, because she said she's sure she would be hated. And she wasn't even daring to share any of that to a white colleague even, because she was afraid she would be also hated by a white colleague even, because what she saw, what she experienced at Union Theological Seminary was even white people were doing all the time self-stabbing she said so, but I agree. So it seems like there is a demand on white people to have to repeatedly confess and to express self-hatred. I'm talking about experience of a radical liberal space. I do acknowledge that. And pardon me, I know I have some union colleague here who is a dear friend to me. So this is what I remember from our discussion. Did I miss anything?
Thank you. Last comment, Hearn.
Uh-oh.
Last comment, and then we'll do some closing comments together.
Oh.
Yeah.
So the I just responding to John that I'm also Canadian and that I think you understand. I think no country is perfect, right? And Canada is in a different space, but doesn't mean that we are like perfect countries in any ways, right? And so one of the ways I think critical religious educators' role is to nuance and not to totalizing, generalizing, and breaststroke, right? And so in that sense, I also want to hold the struggles and resistance and wisdom within the United States. We are in this space, and the space of struggles and wisdom and resistance and hopes, as much as very messy, troublesome, and problematic that we are in. So I think this space is holy, and this space is really messy. And I just want to name that because it is not because we want to make everybody feel miserable and frustrated and confused, right? We are all in it. And we have a different parts to play. So John from the East Coast, which is almost 8 hours by airplane from where I am in Canada, in the West. And the stories of his might be same, but might not be the same. And that sense of, I think, our gathering here of that heterogeneous is not same, differentiating. However, we got work to do differently, depending on where you are at, whether you are students or faculty or seniors, whoever, right? And so the challenge of we got is so wonderful in a way that I'm extremely excited and extremely troubled. And holding both together so that we together can make a small step toward. So thank you.
Thank you, Hearn. We are going to need to close. So real briefly, I'm going to invite Callid and Barbara to come up, and they're going to give some closing remarks and myself as well. So Barbara.
Okay, I just want to thank you, family, for engaging and for some of you enduring this interruption. As I said earlier, we know that family and close spaces sometimes annoy one another, but at the end of the day, we still love and appreciate one another. I want to remind you that many of us responded to a call to be educators, and so I guess the expectation is that we will, as we say in the Black church, eat the meat and throw away the bones. Also, you may know that I am an assistant professor at Howard University School of Divinity, but I have been a hospital and hospice chaplain. I'm currently a hospice chaplain now, and I also believe in giving space to lament as part of healing. And so I hope you experience this final plenary as that space for lament that leads to healing. So whatever your discomfort, that you can wrestle with it and know that eventually it will lead to healing. And I believe to better scholarship, better research, better educator, because that is the call to which we have responded. And I believe that's the expectation that our God has of us, by whatever name you call him.
So two quick things. One is kind of a PSA of sorts. For those of you who aren't aware, in cultures that have such an incredible amount of trauma around these topics, the inability to voice them is sometimes a function of that trauma. So if there are feelings that you are having in your body and are an inability to articulate, that might be exactly okay. It's not good. It's a function of these deep-seated feelings. So it's all right to not be able to put words to that. That's all right. Just want to say that. It's all right. The second thing, in closing, I want to appeal to us as educators to recognize that this conversation is essential for the future of not just our field, but higher ed and in theological education. The numbers that the ATS accrediting body has regarding the next 20 years are very, very clear. The declining number of total students in ATS schools is accompanied by an even more rapid shift upward in the percentage of those students who will be people of color. That's just data. What that means is, as educators, it is absolutely necessary for us to get this stuff figured out. All of us. And that means also shifting the institutions so that not just our syllabi, but our accreditation processes begin to reflect the necessity of this work for the sake of the students that we're going to be having and already have.
Well, we're here at the end, and I want to thank you all for being a part of this conversation and journeying with us, taking us into different places. As I began my comments earlier, this is my 12th year, I think it is, 13th year, coming as a graduate student to now a young junior faculty member to the conferences here. And as I said earlier, people are wondering what space is REA, the guild, for me in my future. I ask those very same questions. And please hear me. I know that other scholars ask that question from a place of great and deep love for the REA. You all have been generous people. So how can we continue to be generous people? So thank you all for participating in this conversation and being a part of the last 2 days and into the third day. And I hope that we continue to do this work together. So go in peace, shalom, and have a good dinner together.